Hello, and welcome to this edition of the Enterprise Applications Podcast. I'm Melody Brew, and I'm joined by Robert Kramer. Today, we have a bunch of great things to talk about. We're going to talk about Google Cloud Next, our insights from that, as well as some of our colleagues' insights from that. We've got the Microsoft Work Trend Index, Canva Create, and some new Adobe updates from their MAX London, which is happening right now as we speak, actually. And then we're going to talk big tech earnings from SAP, IBM, and ServiceNow. But this show is for information and entertainment purposes only. While we will discuss publicly traded companies on the show, its content should not be taken as investment advice. So, with that, let's get started. So, Robert, how are you?
I'm good. How about yourself?
Good. Yeah, it's been busy. We both had some travel. All of us have had some travel lately, but it's been nice actually to be here this week. Lots going on, lots of stuff happening. Busy week, but still kind of here in Austin. But the last time we were both on the road, we're going to talk about two events. You were at Google Cloud Next, and I was at Canva Create. So let's start with Google Cloud Next. You did a really nice overview of what to expect at Google Cloud Next, and then you were there. So was there anything there that you felt like was different than what you were expecting? Kind of what's different than what you told everybody to expect? Or any surprises, or was it kind of
It was part for the course. I
yeah?
think the takeaway that I saw with all these vendors, they have their technology stacks that they have are pretty extensive, right? And they have a lot of different products and solutions and services that they offer. I think the goal with Google Cloud now is how to integrate data and AI into more of a unified platform to make it easier for the customers, to make it where they understand why the products are there and how they mesh together. And this was exactly what we thought, focusing on AI and how AI can support the different types of products that they have and how the products work together in a more unified way. So I thought it was very good. I also did an interview with Major League Baseball, which we already covered in a different episode, but it was focused on how they use some of the products such as BigQuery and Vertex AI and some of the other ones, and how that is used by Major League Baseball with the data elements that are needed from their perspective. So it was a pretty interesting interview, but also seeing Google Cloud in person and being there, I thought was fantastic. And it was nice to meet a lot of the people that were there and see what they're doing.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing that NBA interview that you had. I just was at a Padres game last week, and of course now I'm ultra focused on what's happening around, with all the tech, whether it's the Amazon just walk in or just walk out stores or the servers I can see from my seats. I mean, the cameras were super interesting. Anyway, we always get into sports on the Game Time Tech Pod, but for me, I think for Google Cloud Next, I think that the AI as an operating layer really kind of stood out to me. So really this shift from going from AI as this like experimental feature to this more foundational layer within enterprise technology. And I think with workspace, that kind of translates, I'm getting an Amber Alert as we talk. That translates into evolving into areas beyond kind of just their scope of the productivity suite when I'm talking about a Google Workspace. And that's new tools like Google Vids and Workspace Flows, which is like, we've talked about gems before, but Flows is a way to sort of take these gems and kind of stitch them together for a more automated workflow. So we are already looking at the things like Help Me Analyze in Sheets and things like that. But Flows really is more of like a process automation initiative across all of Workspace. So these custom AI agents like Gems, which I use and I really like actually, I think it kind of highlights more of the development of AI agents and platforms rather than just these like, standalone features. So I thought that it was a great way to show kind of this unified enterprise search and productivity across Google Workspace and a bunch of different third-party applications. So I like that it includes these connectors to like even Microsoft SharePoint, Box, Jira, Salesforce, ServiceNow, Slack, like everything else, in addition to Google's own tools. So I feel like it just allows kind of this multi-platform single interface interaction. So that was kind of my
Do you
big takeaways on that.
think they're simplifying things as I mentioned, or because I do
Yes.
there's some advantages to the customers to understand that where it doesn't get so complex or convoluted with so many
Yeah.
different products and there's some, they want to get my my thought is they're trying to get rid of some of the overlaps where
Hmm.
so because the products where they do overlap, it can be confusing. But anyway, great.
Yeah, and I think everybody is going through this sort of agent defying phase. Like, I think there's really no single definition for agentic AI that everybody has agreed to yet. And I think Google did a really nice job of showing how at least in the workspace environment, how agents can be used, whether it's more of like an assistant, kind of moving through the phases of agentic AI and not just being um, limited to Google's ecosystem in that.
Mhm.
So really kind of like that widespread integration with that infrastructure and interoperability.
Yep, I agree. So you were at Canva, correct? And so how was that?
I
And
was. I was at Canva Create, and so this was the second year, and they said biggest year yet. So just bigger than last year. But uh, what was really nice about this year was there was a lot of emphasis put on like this analyst kind of really, I think there were a small group. But it was a really nice way to meet one on one or two on one or three on one, whatever, in the group with their key executives. And I know they did a little of that last year. To be honest, I came from another event, so I missed some of it. But for me, this was really valuable to have the conversations with the heads of AI and actually even the founders. Um, it was really helpful for me to kind of understand their vision more because I think so far what I've seen has been product. It's a lot of product, a lot of product, a lot of product. But to be able to, and people love their product. I mean, the reality is Canva users are diehard in a way that like they're bringing it into companies, into the enterprise, sometimes on their own. So there is kind of that risk of like bring your own AI with Canva because a lot of people will do that because they're once people use it, they're very comfortable with it. They want to continue using it. But I don't know that the message and the push into really being a large enterprise player is there yet. I think they definitely have, some good traction with some enterprise customers. Those are some of the same customers that Adobe has. So I'm going to look at that and say, if I'm a Coca-Cola or, company, I don't want to call it X because I know we're going to, but company XYZ, um, if you look at that, you can kind of make the assumption that their major enterprise tool they're using is Adobe and that they're using Canva for departmental needs. And that's not a bad move because somebody who is not a marketer or a trained designer who sits in finance or HR or something, Canva is a really useful tool for them. And they've made it even more so in terms of how it can kind of duplicate across just me as a practitioner, where in whatever department I'm in, I no longer have to go in and resize every single image. These can be done at scale. So they're really getting kind of that. They're building that enterprise muscle, introduce some really some actually what I think are really cool new features, one of which is their data visualization. So you're going to have to go in and check this out. But from Sheets, which is their version of like a Microsoft Excel, which also has some cool features in it as well, meaning like you don't have to know all of the functions within Excel to get an answer from your data. But then I think is very interesting is building something based on that. So say I have all my data for, my quarter in there. I want to figure out a way to visually show that to the team or to a client or whatever it is. So I can take all this data and it will actually evaluate the data and then suggest to you the best way to present it. So you don't have to do all this guesswork of like, is this better in a chart? Is this better in a graph? Is this, how is this best like relayed from a data visualization standpoint? And I think, they talked about the data savvy and the data shy. And I think even the data savvy have trouble with that visualization at times. And people need that storytelling when it comes to their data to really be able to kind of see and get a feel for what's going on. So, in general, great event. It was, I thought, very focused in the closed door discussions, very focused on their roadmap, where they want to go with enterprise and kind of their growth trajectory and everything. Externally, meaning who was at the event other than analysts, I thought it was very consumer focused. So I think they still need to figure out how to balance that.
Quick question for you. First of all, I think the technology is fantastic for Canva. I
Mhm.
think that a couple of things, maybe not as many people know about them as they could, meaning that they're not as widespread as like an
They
Adobe. I'm not
have
sure
a they have a ton of users, yeah.
they do, but I'm not sure if their technology is probably more advanced than the customer base. Maybe, maybe not. A couple of things that I thought were some things that I had an issue with. I felt their UI could be a little stronger because I feel like every time I go in there, I'm not trying to get off on a tangent on this. I
You're right.
it's hard to like figure out exactly where to start and finish. And then I see it not as the from an enterprise perspective, it doesn't seem like it's there yet. It's getting there, but it's not as a, from an Adobe standpoint, it's identified and it's clear that it's an enterprise
Yeah.
application. So I'm wondering what you think because you're closer to it than I do, but that was just my perception. I think it's fantastic and it does some amazing things, but I saw those gaps for them to get to the next level.
Yeah. I think you're right, and I think that for users, especially the younger generation that's kind of grown up on Canva, it's a little bit more intuitive for them, probably because as the platform has changed, they've kind of changed along with it. But one of my concerns, and I agree with you that sometimes the user experience can be a little bit, jumpy or unclear. I think one of the things, their own kind of design, their own sort of presentation of what the company can do and what you can do within the application is not as sophisticated as like an enterprise customer would expect it to be.
Right.
So they have to balance like this user friendliness with this kind of the sophistication that like heavy duty marketers and designers want to see. But I do agree with you that sometimes, you can start a design or something and then you're like, I don't know where to go from here. It's not really clear. There's not a whole lot of like hints along the way. And I actually question because they have really strong user numbers, and I question, and actually really strong asset numbers. So like people have created this many assets. Well, I wonder, are those assets to full completion? Or are they something that somebody started playing around with and then it didn't get finished? So that's kind of, some open questions, and definitely, the nice thing is that they've supplied us with like some nice license to actually go in and play around with it. And they're very open about their product and about what could be better. And that to me is a really great sign of kind of an early stage company, which they still are. Um, another one of our big enterprise customers one time said to me, "If my baby is ugly, I want to know. Tell me my baby's ugly."
I mean, the workflows in there are not easy to understand. If they had it almost like simplified and then all those buttons were behind, those identifiers of it's hard. Like if I want to do this, this is what I do. If I want to do this, it's just there's these buttons to make it better or to fix this or to generate this, and it's not clear how you do it.
Yeah.
But
I think that that's a struggle with any kind of creative platforms is that you've got these more advanced users who don't want to be bothered by like a walk me kind of situation, that SCP has, which is, if you're like, it's kind of really weird analogy, but like when I walk through an airport and the guy tells me to put my hands up and my feet on the yellow things, I'm like, dude, I do this twice a week. I know, right? But like he doesn't know that. So like think of that from like an application standpoint. The people who do it all day, every day, they don't want to be bothered by hints and tips and things. So perhaps it's something where you can kind of dial that down and say, like, I want the tips along the way. And then you can turn it off when you feel comfortable, you
part of
know?
your setup, or you beginner, intermediate, advanced, and then it's set up different. I just think there's another level to them. I know we're kind of going around in circles to what they could be to make it easier on the user. But going from that, we go to Microsoft work trends. You wrote an article that was has some really neat stuff in it. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah. So the Microsoft Work Trend Index just came out yesterday, and I wish I had my box of cookies because it's really quite cute. But really, I mean, so the Microsoft Work Trend Index is yearly, and it has so many data points from users and companies studied like throughout. I don't have the number right in front of me, which I should, but um, there is all of these data points that will show kind of where we are in this journey of, well, at this point, where we are in the journey of AI.
Uh-huh.
But also, I think more importantly is that it sets up the problem, which is we are so capacity strained, like in general, the workforce. So this was, okay, now I read it. So it was 31,000 people across 31
Yep.
countries analyzing labor and hiring trends. So this is from LinkedIn, from Microsoft 365 productivity patterns. And then they also interviewed some like AI startups and academics. So the bottom line is people are just at capacity and they're stressed out and they're burnt out. And so what the Work Trend Index has done with all of this data is basically kind of outlined a little bit of like the capacity challenge and then also what's going to fix it. Like where are we in this sort of one overload and two like what's the next kind of shift of the role of AI in the workplace. And I think I really liked the kind of part of my analysis was really like there's the burden and the benefit, right? Because AI is really supposed to be like streamlining our work processes and everything, but sometimes it actually is contributing to the information overload, right? So
Completely.
we're trying to like take in all this information. We're trying to process like how do we use this tool? What do we use this tool for, right? And so, and then like I said, like people are bringing their own tools into the workplace. And so one that introduces a whole bunch of risks, which we talked about in last year's Work Trend Index on bring your own AI. Um, but people, I mean, that use of bring your own AI is still reflecting that behavior that people are evolving what they want to do and what they can do with AI ahead of what the workforce is actually directing them to. So the interesting thing is they laid out kind of this journey to becoming a frontier firm. And these frontier firms look very different than firms now, which is like going from more of like a organizational chart to a work chart, basically a like the work that needs to get done. Um, Really interesting, some numbers on becoming an agent boss, meaning like how to manage and handle agents and you kind of can see like the time savings and the usage on that. And in every category, leaders were outpacing employees. So seeing AI as a career accelerator, regular AI use, using AI as a thought partner, already seeing the impact of AI. So leaders are leading, repetitive, sorry, in that regard. But really, there's the other part of that was just the very important part of the upskilling and kind of preparing the workforce for AI. So full article linked in the show notes, but definitely I would take a really good look at that because there's some very interesting things. And I think things that companies need to take note of, but employees and leaders need to take note of. Like
But
these are things that are happening now, and people have to be prepared for it. And I think that the Work Trend Index did a really good job of laying out what do we need to be prepared for, how are we going to prepare for it, and where are we going to be in the next couple of months. So
do you think that employees are scared of AI?
100%.
And do you think that they're scared for the right reasons or the wrong reasons? Because the wrong reason, it could be the same reason, meaning that they're scared for their jobs. But the way I, because if it's position transparency from leaders that it's a tool for our strategy to be more efficient, and we're going to utilize the people in a way that you're be able to be more effective, but we're not going to remove you. But it could be that AI does remove the ones that have been non-productive at the same time. So how do you feel about all that?
So I do think that there still remains like kind of this fear of AI and what AI is going to do to replace jobs, and it just gets more and more confusing when you listen to leaders from various companies, and then also when you kind of weigh in what the economic realities are right now. There may be some necessity of people being replaced by AI, at least in the short term.
Yep.
Um, but the reality is, I mean, I listened to a really interesting podcast with Jensen Huang the other day that he said that people are not going to be replaced by AI. And mind you, this was like 2 years ago, but it was still, I think, very relevant. Where he said that as long as if companies run out of ideas, then they have no need for people.
Right.
But as long as they want to continue to have new ideas, and of course, AI can be somewhat of a thought partner, but if your company is doing really well because you have this, added productivity and all of the promise of AI, then your company is thriving, which means you're probably going to hire more people.
Yeah.
And yes, maybe some of those workers are going to be digital workforce, but there's always going to be areas for innovation where people are required and where people are going to have to at least be managing or overseeing the AI. And so I think we're still in that early phase of like is AI going to replace people? The other part of that is that, like, okay, think about just the economics of this. If AI replaces half the workforce, who has the money to buy the products you're making in the first place? Like, so you don't want to necessarily take away people's paychecks for AI when you're trying to sell a product to people, right? So I think there's
Well,
a
well
lot
said.
to be considered in that, but definitely a lot of really interesting data coming out of this Work Trend Index, way more than these particular talking points. So I would encourage take a look at it.
Great. So then we go from Microsoft to Adobe, and then we'll kind of hit some of the earnings.
Yeah,
A little
some of
bit
those
about,
earnings might reflect some of those things, actually. Yes.
so
So, Adobe Max is actually happening as we speak. It is in London. Was watching some of the keynotes earlier. There's a lot of stuff. I think kind of some of the bigger announcements are with the Firefly image models. So image model 4. So these are production ready models with lifelike detail. I mean, when you look at the comparison of the last Firefly models and then the more current Firefly models, the comparison of what they produce is just actually like you have to kind of see it to really understand the impact. But the Firefly video model is now GA. There's a beta of Firefly boards, which is kind of like this mood boarding concept exploration. And it's, of course, AI surface, a lot of really cool things that you can do within that. Um, they did announce actually partner models that are available. And the way that they talked about this was really interesting. So, in a lot of AI interfaces, we have a choice of what model to use. And the way that, on a pre briefing, the way that they talked about this was getting to know the personalities of these models and figuring out what they're best at. And so basically what Adobe is saying is like these their Firefly model might not always be the exact model that you need. And here are these other ones, and some are used best for this and some are used best for this. And so you can really kind of explore that and figure out where, each one is best for you. So couple quick things, some updates in Adobe Express. They had a couple, partnership expansions. I'm going to be writing up a full, whole kind of evaluation of all of this, but those are, I think, some of the big things. The other thing I would say, and this is actually very interesting, kind of relating back to Canva, is Adobe's really maximizing right now for a new generation of content user or content creators. So, and that means, putting things like app and web-based first, really giving people control over their content on their mobile device and on the web app rather than like within the actual tools. Free products like Photoshop for iPhone, Android will be next. Things that really kind of empower this next generation of creatives to really start to play around with and use Adobe's tools. That's something Canva has really done quite a lot,
Mhm.
which is, start with that younger generation and cater to that generation. Adobe has done some of that, and certainly a lot with kind of the user I was talking about before, the HR leaders, the finance leaders, the ones who aren't living in creative tools every day. Express is fantastic for that. Like Express is, I don't like to use the word democratize, but Express democratizes creative.
Good.
So, but yeah, some good things coming out of Max. I love Max. I have to say the energy and like the creativity and the people that you meet at Max. It's like, it almost makes you feel like a little bit like I'm so boring. But they're good. It's so fun. I wish I was there.
Well, that's fun. Well, good. Should
Yeah.
we jump into some of the, we got some earnings to talk about. We'll kind of just end with that and lean towards the next time we get together. But
Yeah.
want to see if you agree with this. It seems that there's some strong growth with with many of the IT giants, because of the fact that they're focused on AI and cloud and SaaS, driving SaaS and revenues for, for the, what the customers are looking for.
Mhm.
IBM and SAP and ServiceNow are some of those companies that we'll talk about in a second, but they're also looking to kind of bunker down a little bit to understand kind of the issues that are happening in the world to make sure that they're not too over uh, zealous. So they want to be a little conservative at the same time, and I think
Yeah.
that somewhat reflecting in the numbers, but maybe not for all of them that we're going to talk about. But SAP, we're seeing them as a very strong first quarter that's based on their customers modernizing to go to the cloud base from on-prem, and their up total revenue was up 12%. But what I was interested is a lot of companies I feel are not necessarily spending as much money as they would be in the past because of the economic climate. But at the same time, I think ERP is a little bit less of an issue to spend money on because it takes a long time to get it done. The transformation doesn't happen overnight. But SAP's, cloud situation is paying off because of the focus that they're putting on AI and the supply chain solutions in their ERP. But one of the things that I've talked about in the past, and I think is going to be a potential issue for the rest of this year and next year, some of the customers, they have concerns over these transformations being successful because, as we've noted before, two-thirds of legacy systems are still on-prem. 30% of those transformation projects actually meet the customer expectations. So I'm wondering, see what your thought is, but we can also talk about it later. Do the programs they have address the concerns of the customers, rise with SAP, grow with SAP, to to actually be able to migrate off premise to modernize to the cloud and address the fear factors that these customers have? So I think that that's just a growing concern that I have always seen, and change management being a significant component, and these fears and data quality issues at the same time. But SAP very strong, but it's indicative of how many clients they have, and the play to go to modernization is emphasized through their numbers.
Mhm. So I think, there's been the discussion around this kind of earnings season about, how are companies guiding, how are companies thinking about the potentials of what could happen in the economy, and that, there are companies that are, somewhat immune to it because they're service driven. But I still think that their enterprise customers are still affected by this uncertainty. And so even though there's not tariffs, at least not so far, tariffs on services, companies are still pulling back financially on things because they're not really sure how much should I be investing in this transformation period over, you know, it, do we make that decision now? These are long-term decisions. And so you could argue that just wait it out and go for it and deal with it when it comes because you've got to do it one way or another? Or are they wise to be more proactive and kind of pull back a little? So I think that's just a conversation that is going to be had across almost every earnings
Yep.
this, in this period of time, whether the people are guiding down or guiding up. I mean, there's just the market is going to react to that for one reason or another, whether they think that they should be, or people are afraid the tariffs are going to significantly affect the company or not. I still think that there's some kind of overall fears that are influencing.
Right, I agree. Well, IBM had similar results, and they had a lot of progress in the first quarter. This was due to a shift to software and AI, and also focusing on the customer. And I think this means to the customers that enterprise grade AI integrated into their systems is helping them. And with that drive towards AI for IBM, the customers are starting to see the benefits. Also, IBM's purchase of uh, HashiCorp solidifies the hybrid cloud and the DevOps strategy. So we're seeing a lot of strategy changes. And I know rose to 14.5 billion, which was up 7% in software, and strong performance in the hybrid cloud. But one of the things that they had a drop in was the IBM Z revenue, which was down 15%. And I think this is a potential issue, long short term, but probably not long term because of their mainframe customers. But
Mhm.
the shift towards software, AI, and hybrid cloud is obviously a great priority for them, and it's going to probably pay dividends long term. But short term, I think that you're seeing growth everywhere except for the, the Z. But I wanted to see what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to consider that the Z17 just was announced, so the mainframe hardware was at a low, but I don't know that that's, gonna be like a really strong indicator quite yet.
Yep. Okay. So why don't we touch base on ServiceNow? I know we're kind of hitting the past 30-minute mark, but we're almost done.
We are. We'll wrap this up real quick because I'm going to ServiceNow to Knowledge
Yep.
pretty soon. So really looking forward to having kind of that one-on-one and straight talk from the executives beyond what you hear on an earnings call. But I listened to the ServiceNow earnings call yesterday, and I will say that one thing that I noticed is Bill McDermott he's always bullish. He's always um, animated and tons of
Right.
energy. but I felt it even stronger yesterday. And I'm not sure if you picked up on that as well, but they've been building this for years, this layer that kind of sits on top of everybody's enterprise. And I think he's just coming out and saying, this is our time. We've done it right. We've been doing it right. Kind of, we were meant for this, was sort of it sounded like a locker room, like rah rah session. And
Like Al
for the,
Pacino would do.
what's that?
He's like Al Pacino, like he's in a great movie that talked about, in the locker room, but he's fantastic and very inspirational. But like you said, the technology's there.
Yes. And I think for the first time, we heard Bill get a little bit more competitive than he's been in the past. Meaning, he's said before, we don't need to take on anybody else to win this. And now he's kind of saying, you know what? Actually, we might be taking you on. And so there was a shift in that, which I think, he's always got confidence in the company. He's never wavered on that. But I think if you look at something like the CRM market, a year and a half ago, they were kind of tiptoeing around entering into the CRM market, being able to compete there. They had one of the strongest revenues in that category. Now I think they're really like putting their stake in the ground and saying, we're going after this market, and we're doing it well. So
Great following. I think you're going to love being at their conference in a few weeks, and think they're going to be able to show you a little bit more than what you've seen before, and how it can be applied to certain nuances that it's not really the mainstream, but could be a difference maker for a lot of these enterprises.
yeah.
So,
All
right.
right.
Should we
You
wrap
want to
up?
wrap it up?
Yeah. I'm actually going to see Mel next week at an Oracle event.
Yes, that's
Between
right.
now, so that'll be really nice. And then the following week, I'll be at IBM Think. I think you'll be at ServiceNow, and the following week I'll be at a company called Informatica. So it'll be a busy May. So
Yeah, we've got a whole list of where our analysts will be, and it's long, but it's on our website if anybody wants to check that out.
take a look. But Robert Kramer, Melanie Brew, thank you for joining Enterprise Apps Podcast. If you like what you see, please send us an email and tell us what you would like to see more of and what we might have missed, so we can make sure that we address some of your topics for future episodes. See the show notes. We have a lot of details there. But for today, Robert and Mel, we'll see you later. Thank you for joining.
Bye.